some sort of a bad habit? Raise your hand. Nobody? All right, that's more like, I think everybody in here has had a bad habit at one point or another. Um, and I think most of us at some point, if we've had a bad habit, we've tried to kick that bad habit, tried to get over that bad habit. Because most of the time, they're bad habits for a reason. They affect us, they affect somebody else, they're either annoying to other people, they can be frustrating to ourselves, they can be harmful to ourselves, they can be harmful to others. So all of us have had some sort of struggle with a bad habit. And even once you overcome that bad habit, you may have been over that habit for months or years, and then something will happen, some sort of stressor will happen, some sort of issue in life will happen, and next thing you know, you're right back in doing whatever that is. Maybe that's biting your nails, maybe that's just general anxiety, maybe that's, you know, could be a addiction, some sort of alcohol abuse or substance abuse, things like that. But for some reason, we all have these habits, and even if there's something that we try not to do, something we try to get away from, things in our life can bring those back and cause us to go right back into those habits. So that's what we're going to talk a little bit about tonight. Tonight we're going to start in Genesis chapter 12 in verse 10. Genesis chapter 12, verse 10. And there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down into Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was grievous in the land. And it came to pass, when he was come near to enter into Egypt, that he said unto Sarai his wife, Behold now, I know that thou art a fair woman to look upon. Therefore it shall come to pass, when the Egyptians shall see thee, that they shall say, This is his wife, and they will kill me, but they will save thee alive. Say, I pray thee, thou art my sister, that it may be well with me for thy sake, and my soul shall live because of thee. And it came to pass that when Abram was come into Egypt, the Egyptians beheld the woman, that she was very fair. The princes also of Pharaoh saw her, and commended her before Pharaoh, and the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. And he entreated Abram well for her sake, and he had sheep and oxen and asses, and men servants and maiden servants, and she asses and camels. And the Lord plagued Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. And Pharaoh called Abram and said, What is this thou hast done unto me? Why didst thou not tell me that she was thy wife? Why saidst thou, She is my sister? So I might have taken her to me to wife. Now therefore, behold thy wife, take her and go thy way. And Pharaoh commanded his men concerning him, and they sent him away, and his wife, and all that he had. So, if we think about it, throughout the Bible, there's multiple times that there's famine in the land. And a majority of the time, or there's just a trial, there's something going on, and a majority of the time, the people involved in the issue, they go to Egypt. It's for whatever reason, that was the place that they always went back to. And if you look through the Bible, you read through the Bible, there's nothing good ever said about Egypt. Everything's bad. We talked about this the other night in the Joseph study, is that Egypt is always a type of the world. It's always a type of carnality. It's always a type of sin. Yet every single time, so we can go through and we can look at a few different biblical figures that have gone through this. Abraham fled to Egypt during a famine. Isaac actually was faced with a famine, and the Lord told him not to go to Egypt, and he did obey. Joseph's brothers went to Egypt for grain during the famine. We have Jeroboam, who sought refuge in Egypt to escape Solomon's wrath after he was prophesied as the future king. And then after the fall of Jerusalem, a remnant of Judah went back to Egypt, even after God expressly told them, do not go to Egypt. All of these people still went to Egypt. And then after the children of Israel came out of Egypt, came out of bondage, Moses had led them away. They have this 400 years or so of slavery, of bondage in Egypt, and Moses comes in. The Lord uses him to lead them out, and then they come to the Red Sea, and they're like, well, what are we going to do? They didn't just turn around and go back to Egypt. They sought the Lord. The Lord said, all right, well, I'm going to part the waters. So he parts the waters, huge miracle. The Lord leads them through onto the other side on dry ground. There's a lot of people out there that try to make it like, they went over on this area, that it wasn't very deep, wasn't a big deal. But I don't believe that that's what happened. I believe that they crossed over a sea. I believe that God parted the waters on both sides. I believe that every bit of ground that they walked on was dry as the desert in the middle of the Sahara. I think that there was a wall of water on each side, and it was a perfect miracle. There was no way that man can explain it away. And then Egyptians come through. That ground's no more. It's not dry. It's all muddy. It's all mucky, and they get caught. The Lord dumps the water back after the Israel gets through. Performs a huge miracle there, right? So God's led them all to this point, and then they're like, well, now we don't have any food. They trusted God up to this point, and then now all of a sudden it's like, well, we don't have anything to eat. Let's just go back to Egypt. Forget everything God's done for us so far. Let's just go back to Egypt. They had leeks, they had garlic, they had all this stuff. They don't mention that, well, I got beat 3 times a day because I wasn't producing enough bricks, or I got, they yelled and screamed and did all these mean things to me. They had onions. Let's go back to Egypt because we don't got no onions, all right? So they're starting to get into a trial, and immediately they're like, all right, let's go back. Let's go to Egypt. Once again, Egypt is a type of sin. Egypt's a type of the world. Egypt's a type of carnality. Now, you may wonder, why is Egypt the place that God is always trying to get them away from? Why does God care so much about Egypt? Why does he hate Egypt so much? And if you look at just the basic characteristics of Egypt, especially of ancient Egypt, they were polytheistic, so they were idol worshippers. Everything that they did, they worshipped the god of the sun, they worshipped the god of the Nile, they worshipped the god of this, the god of that. All of their rulers they looked at as gods. Everything that they could potentially pin the word God to, they pinned the word God to, and they worshiped them. So they're polytheistic. Well, if we think about God in the 10 Commandments, first commandment is, thou shalt have no other gods before me. Egypt's the exact opposite. Egypt's a place of slavery. So they were in slavery for hundreds of years. They were in bondage to Egypt, much like we were in bondage to sin, much like many times we allow ourselves to still be in bondage to sin and be slaves to sin. Egypt was that way. They were obsessed with material wealth. So if you look at ancient Egypt, they were all about money. They were all about jewels. They were all about gold and silver. If you look into any information about the tombs, all of the pharaohs' crypts, all of their graves are just filled with all of these wonderful things that are very expensive, because that's what they cared about. They cared about money. They cared about wealth. They cared about material things. If we look in the Bible, let's go to Colossians chapter 3. Colossians chapter 3 in verse 2 says, set your affections on things above, not on things on the earth, right? We're supposed to be setting our affections on things that are godly, not things that are worldly. The Egyptians were all about things in this world. Jump over to Matthew chapter 6. I may be going through these a little too fast for you, so don't feel bad if you can't get to it. Matthew chapter 6, verse 19. The Bible says, lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth, where moth and rust doth corrupt, where thieves break through and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt, and where thieves do not break through nor steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. The Egyptians weren't laying aside treasures for heaven. They weren't laying aside spiritual treasures. They were laying aside treasures, but they were laying aside all of these material things that they could put in their graves to take with them to the afterlife. And we know that the Bible talks about all of that is going to be burnt up. So in addition to that, it was a place filled with moral corruption. So everything about Egypt was corrupt morally. They performed human sacrifices. So if that's the only thing that we have to say about Egypt being a horrible place, is that they performed human sacrifices, that's enough. Sexual immorality was rampant throughout Egypt, and then occult practices. So when Moses goes to Pharaoh and says, let my people go, God gave him the ability to throw his rod down, and it became a snake. Turn right around, magicians of Egypt did the exact same thing. They said, well, we can do that too. They throw theirs down, and it becomes a snake. Moses turned the water to blood. They were able to do the same thing. But most of the time when we think magic, we think illusions, we think distractions, we think sleight of hand. When I was a kid, I really like magic. I love going to magic shows. I enjoyed learning card tricks and things like that. But all of it is about deception. None of it's real. You're never going to go to a magic show where something that they do that is like mind blowing is actually real. These magicians, what they did was real. This wasn't a trick. This wasn't, hey, watch this hand, and I'm going to do something with this hand and make you think that I did something amazing. These guys were connected to some sort of demonic um, abilities, and they were able to do these things. They were called soothsayers. They're called magicians. Um, you know, any of those terms that you can apply to people who do sorts of magic, and it's all throughout the Bible. It's not just here. But specifically in Egypt, it talks about them in a few different places. But these are all some big reasons as to why the Lord hated Egypt. All of these things are pictures of the world. All these things are pictures and types of sin and how we are connected to it. So what I've realized is that hardship drives people to sinful solutions. And most of the time it ends very badly. But in every single one of these instances where someone experienced famine or experienced a hardship, their initial reaction was, "Hey, let's go to Egypt. Let's go where it's easy. Let's go where it's simple." And they didn't say, "Hey, let's sit here for a second. Let's trust the Lord. Let's see what God wants us to do." Abraham could have said, "God, what do you want me to do? Where do you want me to go? I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know how I'm going to feed my flocks. I don't know how I'm going to feed my family. I ain't got a clue, but you've led me so far, I can continue to trust you." And if you think about it, we don't know how long the time was between verse 1 and verse 10 was, so we don't know how long it's been since Abraham was called out of the Ur of the Chaldees. It could have been a month, could have been a year, it could have been 2 years. We don't know. The Bible doesn't say. But more than likely, when God called him out of the land of his family, that wasn't the first time that Abraham had a relationship with the Lord. I highly doubt that the first introduction to God that Abram had was, "Hey, Abram, trust me and let's go." I believe that he'd had a relationship with the Lord for a while, and eventually the Lord worked through his heart and said, "Hey, now let's go." But the Lord had led him thus far. He had had all this time to trust God. He had had all this time to experience God providing for him. He knew that God led him from his family's land to go to a land that was promised to him. So if God had led him that far, why did he not think, well, God's told me to go here. Instead of just doing what I think is good and going to Egypt, let me see what God wants me to do. Let's just hang out here for a few days. Let's pray. Let's seek the Lord and see what he wants us to do. But unfortunately, his initial reaction is, "Hey, let's take the easy way out. It's not very far to Egypt. Let's go. It'll be simple. They'll have everything we need, and we'll be satisfied. No big deal." We sit here. We want to bash Abram and say, what a terrible decision. Why do you do that? But we do the exact same thing so many times. We experience some sort of problem, and the first thing we do is we go back to the world. We go to something that the world has for us. We go back to besetting sin that we have. We go back to bad habits. We neglect our Bible reading. We neglect our prayer time. And a lot of times, we were talking about this in one of the Wednesday night groups a while back, is that a lot of times when people start to have issues, people who go to church, they're Christians, a lot of times they just quit going to church anymore. And it's sad because you think this is where you're going to get help. This is where you're going to get the right kind of help. But instead of getting closer to the people at church, instead of seeking their pastor's advice, instead of seeking the Lord's advice and the will of God, they just say, well, I'm done. I'm going to go do what's easy. It's hard to go to church. And if you're going through a trial, it can be hard to go to church, put a good face on, and make it look like you're happy and there's no issues in your life. And a lot of times that's what the devil uses to pull people away from the Lord. Is that he allows these trials, and sometimes these trials are not the devil. Sometimes these trials are God saying, "Hey, get closer to me. Let me put you through something that you can learn to trust me more." But the devil, he's going to use that to try to get you further away from the Lord. So let's talk a little bit about why we turn to sin. Why do we go back to sin? Why do we go back to these bad habits that we have when we experience a trial? So one is it's easier. It's so much easier just to go back to the things that feel good. So much easier to just skip the things of church, skip the things of God. You know, it takes time and it takes effort to get into your Bible and study the Word. It takes time and effort to pray every day. And it's a whole lot easier just to say, I'll do that tomorrow, than it is to really get back into the Word and really seek the Lord's will. Um, and it just our natural tendency is not to trust God. A lot of people we don't trust anyone. We trust ourselves, we trust our own judgment, and that's all we trust. We don't trust the Lord. We don't, if you think COVID, I don't know if I mentioned this before, but there was a church that I did some work at, and when COVID hit, they shut their doors, like a lot of churches did, completely shut down. But I think it was 2023, so we're a year, 2 years out of COVID, where churches had started going back pretty regularly. They still had one service a month, and I'm like, how are you still 2 years after everything is open back up? You're still only meeting one time a month. Like, that's just absolutely ridiculous to me. But they still, at that point, and I understand that there were some people that really did struggle with COVID. I don't want to demean anyone that had issues, but ultimately, God is the ultimate physician. He's going to take care of us. And there were so many people during that time that it just really showed how little lack of faith and how little the church trusts God as a whole. And that just kind of blew my mind, that it's like, y'all don't trust God enough to go back to church. Years after COVID has hit, I think what happened is, I think they got scared, they closed down, and then they just got used to having online services, and they were like, well, one service a month is enough for us. But that's how the devil works. He allows us to skip out on our trust and not have faith in God, and then from there we just continue to tumble downhill. But for all of these people that went to Egypt during famines, if you think about it, is it easier? Now, none of us, I don't think, have ever been in a famine where there was no way to get food. But if you're in a famine, there's no water, there's no food for your cattle, there's no food for your family. The easiest option is not, hey, let's sit here and just see what God does. Maybe we die, maybe we don't. Your initial reaction is going to be like, I'm going to take care of my family. I know there's grain in Egypt. I know there's food in Egypt. We'll be taken care of. I'm just going to go do it. And we wouldn't see God most of the time about it. We would just say, I know what I'm doing. I'll take care of it. And that's the way that most of these were. And some of them went to Egypt because they were afraid of someone. They were afraid that someone was going to take them into bondage. They were afraid someone was going to kill them. But once again, I just think it's interesting that Egypt is the place for all of these, where all of these people went. But if you think about it from a scientific aspect, so there's a couple shows that my wife has watched. I'm sure some of you have seen them. One is My 600-Pound Life, and one is it's called Hoarders. And they talk a lot about how most of the people that are in either situation, they're super morbidly obese, can't even get out of bed half the time, or they're hoarders to the point to where you can't walk in their house without stepping on something. There's all sorts of nasty stuff. And I was a plumber for almost 10 years, and I've seen this in person, and it's nasty. You cannot imagine how people can live in this nastiness and this filth. But most of the time, there's some sort of trauma that happens to these people when they're kids, when they're young. Something happens to them that's a horrible situation, and they go into comfort mode. They say, I want to eat. I'm going to eat. And that just starts this process, all because of something that happened to them, all because of some sort of trial, all because of some sort of issue that they experienced in life. And that drove them to, I'm just going to eat and eat and eat and eat until they're 600-700 pounds. And these other people, the hoarder people, that is their comfort. All of their stuff, all of the things that they have, they feel like they have to buy these things. They feel like they can't ever get rid of these things because maybe something that they really valued was torn away from them at a young age, and they just cannot let. That's what they love. That's what they need the most, is all of this stuff. and they just get to a point to where it impacts their health and it impacts everyone around them. And it's we talk about it, we laugh about it, but it's really sad, and it's sad to see how people can be so impacted by one thing that happened 40, 50, 60 years ago or 20 years ago. And maybe it was a series of events that happened, but one trial, one trouble, a series of trials just drew them. And now these are extreme cases that we're talking about, but there's also stories about people who they went through a trial and they turned to alcohol, they turned to drugs. One of them, there was a man that I believe he was working towards becoming a pastor, and I think he lost. Something happened in his life. I don't remember the exact situation, but something happened, and he started going out, started drinking regularly, and just completely wrecked his life. And then eventually, the Lord got a hold of him, got him back in church, and it ended up his name is William Booth. He was the one that started the Red Cross. Red Cross or the other one of the missions, Salvation Army. That's right. Yep, Salvation Army. So God can still use those people. That doesn't mean that they're done with, but it just goes to show you how one little thing in your life, or at that time probably big to you, can make you choose the easy way, make you choose something that makes you feel good about it. But if you look at it, like I said, from a specifically scientific, it's what causes that is something called dopamine. So dopamine is a chemical messenger in the brain that signals pleasure and reward, motivating us to repeat behaviors that feel good. It's released in areas like the nucleus accumbens, a key part of the brain's reward system. So when we experience something that is enjoyable, whether that's eating, whether that's drugs, whether that's alcohol, whether that's something sexual, whether that's something anything else in your life that you feel like you enjoy, whether adrenaline can be one of those things. You got all these guys on the Red Bull stuff that they're adrenaline junkies, and they say that for a reason. Like they get a high off of this adrenaline rush and this excitement, and it's because of this dopamine. So when you do something pleasurable, so like for any of those who like chocolate or you like ice cream, you take a bite of that builds that dopamine in your system, and it causes you to want to go back and get more. So this dopamine really isn't a great thing because most of the time it's not tied to something good. Most of the time our dopamine does not kick in because we're singing a song that makes us get closer to the Lord or something that helps us worship the Lord more. Most of the time it's connected to something negative. And that's part of the reason that so many times when something bad happens, we're looking for something that's comforting. We're looking for something that is going to make us feel good. And for a lot of people, that's eating. For a lot of people, that's just sitting on the couch binge watching. Sometimes that is just allowing yourself to go into depression. And you sit there and you think, how can somebody enjoy going into depression? And it's not necessarily the depression that they're enjoying, it's they feel comfortable just backing out of society. They're more comfortable not talking to anyone, not allowing anyone to come into their life and talk to them about the issues that they're going through. And then that just has a snowball effect into depression. But there's so many studies out there that you can find that talk about how these dopamine-driven habits are bad, how they affect people's desires when they're going through something traumatic. But most of the time it's stress-driven. So stress depletes the cognitive resources and it prevents you from having as much discipline. So that's why when you're stressed out, you start doing things that you wouldn't normally do because you don't have as much control. You don't have as much control over what your desires are, and they just automatically go back to those habits and those behaviors. Much like these people, their first instinct, they all wanted to, let's go to Egypt. It's simple, it's easy. We know we're going to be taken care of. We'll be satisfied in Egypt. We're not going to have to worry about anything. Let's talk about some of the consequences. So every single time that we read in the Bible that somebody went back to Egypt, there's a consequence for it. The Bible says there's pleasure in sin for a season, and that's the truth. And that pleasure may be to us for a long time. That your season may be years, and it also could. There's some people that we think, hey man, I don't understand how they're getting by with this. They just have been living a life like this for so many years. They don't, everything's good in their life still, even though they're not in church, they're not doing the right things. Why are they not being judged? Why do they not have consequences? But eventually, if that consequence is a loss of rewards in heaven, that's still a consequence. That season is going to end at some point. And personally, for me, I would much rather have a consequence here on earth and be able to get right and do what's right for the last however many years of my life than deal with consequences in heaven. Because once you get to heaven, whatever rewards you get, those are the rewards that you get, and that's it. You don't get a second chance. Well, let me go back and live. We don't get a second chance in the millennium reign. We don't get to say, well, I may not have lived a great life in my regular life, but now that we're in millennium, I'm going to do what's right. We don't get that chance. Once we get past our judgment, what we get in rewards is all that we get forever. And I think that there will be, based on when all of those tears are dried, I think that there will be a time when we're judged that we will be embarrassed at the judgment. I don't think that it's going to just all be, hey, this is great, we're all happy. I think during that judgment, even as Christians, we're going to be embarrassed that, man, they all had to see all this and I didn't get nothing. I don't get any crowns to cast at his feet. So even if that's where the consequence is, there's always going to be a consequence to that sin. There's always going to be a consequence for going back away from the Lord when we get into a troublesome time. So if we look at Abram specifically, you go through. He says, hey, we need to go to Egypt, and what he ends up doing is he ends up compromising his beliefs. Instead of telling the truth and saying she's my wife, he says no, and this is super selfish. He says they are going to think that you are super attractive and they're going to kill me. They can take you, I don't care. Just don't tell them I'm your husband. And he probably sits there and thinks, well, it's partially true. She is my half sister, which is the case. But he wouldn't have had to do that if he had waited on the Lord. If he had let the Lord lead him and guide him in the way that he was to go, he wouldn't have ever had to lie. He wouldn't have had to. Now, you say, well, he did get treated well. It says, and he entreated Abram well for her sake. He had sheep and oxen and asses and men servants and maid servants and she asses and camels. So he was treated really well, but that was not God's treatment. That was not God's judgment for him going to Egypt. That was not God allowing him to get rich because he lied about his wife. That was the devil trying to keep him in Egypt. That was the devil trying to say, hey, look at all this good stuff that you're getting, even though you don't feel really good about what you did maybe. You're getting all these wonderful things. You're getting all of these pleasures, all of this wealth, this cattle. But that is the devil. He's always, anytime that the Lord is trying to draw you closer to him, the devil's always going to give you something that's going to make you want to stay away. So even if you're living in a life of sin, the devil's always going to give you something that is going to be attractive, like Pastor was talking about this morning. He's always going to try to throw something better out there for you to grab onto and latch onto to stay away from the Lord. So the consequences after Abraham and he lies, he ends up being embarrassed. The king of Egypt, Pharaoh, comes up to him and says, like, dude, what in the world's wrong with you? Why did you lie to me? Why would you do this to, and allow me to potentially take your wife as my wife and commit sin? At this point, Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, is a much more godly man than Abraham is being at this time. And the Lord plagues Pharaoh, and Pharaoh realizes what's going on. Abram's embarrassed, and not only that, but he's kicked out of Egypt. So Pharaoh says, "Get out. I don't want to see you again. And now he's not only embarrassed, but now he's kicked out of Egypt because he decided to follow his instincts and do what he wanted to do instead of what the Lord wanted to do. Um, we talk about the story of Joseph. So Joseph ends up being sold into slavery, and he's the only circumstance where you can see some sort of a silver lining on his story about being in Egypt, but he was not he didn't voluntarily go to Egypt. He was forced going to Egypt, and he did the best that he could possibly do in that situation. But his brethren ended up coming, and they ended up, his father Jacob was, if you read through it, he was reluctant to go to Egypt and to stay in Egypt. He wasn't really sure about it, but then his sons talked to him about it and said, hey, David's got a place, or Joseph has a place for us, let's go. So he ended up going. Everything's all fine and dandy, seems great, until you get to the beginning of, I think it's like the first verse in Exodus. No, it is, where is it? I don't remember, but it talks about how the Pharaoh at the time, they'd all forgotten Joseph. They didn't know Joseph, and they ended up putting them into bondage. They said, hey, these people are getting too strong. There's too many of them. We can't let that keep going because eventually somebody's going to start a war, and what if they side with the other team? Let's just put them in bondage. Now, I don't know why they didn't just treat them super well and try to keep them on their side, but that's not what the world does. They make you think that they like you, and then they stab you in the back. So everything with Joseph's situation seems all like it's wonderful, seems like it's fine and dandy. They're being taken care of, but further down the road, there's consequences. They end up in slavery for 400 something years before the Lord brings them out of that slavery. We talked about Jeroboam. So Jeroboam flees and goes to Egypt. So Jeroboam ends up, he was prophesied to become the king of Israel, and Solomon, he was trying to kill him, and so he runs to Egypt instead of staying where he was supposed to. He runs to Egypt, gets involved in their lifestyle, gets involved in all of the idolatry, gets involved in the ways of the Egyptians, the ways of the world. When he comes back, he becomes king, and then he leads Judah into idolatry. So the consequences weren't only for Jeroboam, they were also for the entire country. And they ended up falling into idolatry. Later on, after Jerusalem fell, there was a remnant that were from Judah that went to Egypt. They were hoping that they could avoid the Babylonian captivity, trying to get away so that they wouldn't have to be put into bondage. And the Lord had expressly said, do not go to Egypt. Let me find that. Jeremiah chapter 42. Let's all go ahead and go here. Jeremiah chapter 42. Jeremiah 42, verse 15. Jeremiah 42, verse 15 says, And now therefore hear the word of the Lord, ye remnant of Judah. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, If ye wholly set your faces to enter into Egypt, and go to sojourn there, then it shall come to pass that the sword which ye feared shall overtake you there in the land of Egypt, and the famine whereof ye were afraid shall follow close after you there in Egypt, and there ye shall die. So God says, look, it doesn't matter what you guys are afraid of. If you go to Egypt, everything that you're fearing is going to follow you into Egypt, and it's going to be just as bad for you there, if not worse. And if we look at chapter 44, verse 12, Jeremiah 44:12 says, And I will take the remnant of Judah that have set their faces to go into the land of Egypt to sojourn there, and they shall all be consumed and fall in the land of Egypt. They shall even be consumed by the sword and by the famine. They shall die from the least even unto the greatest by the sword and by the famine. And they shall be an execration and an astonishment and a curse and a reproach. For I will punish them that dwell in the land of Egypt, as I have punished Jerusalem, by the sword, by the famine, and by the pestilence. So that none of the remnant of Judah which are gone into the land of Egypt to sojourn there shall escape or remain, that they should return into the land of Judah, to the which they have a desire to return to dwell there, for none shall return but such as shall escape. So essentially what it's saying is there's a few that end up escaping, but all of the rest of them are going to die. And because the Lord specifically said in chapter 42, do not go to Egypt. If you go to Egypt, I am going to do these things to you that you were already fearing was going to happen to you to begin with. So they decide, well, we don't care. We're going to go to Egypt anyway, right? They go to Egypt. Everything that they feared that the Babylonians were going to do to them in Jerusalem, they ended up experiencing in Egypt as well. And all but just a handful died. And it doesn't matter how smart we think we are. It doesn't matter how much we try to hide what we're doing, or how many people we can get involved. We are all going down the wrong road. We are all going to end up having consequences for those actions. Sin is always going to cost us something. Sometimes that's a relationship. It could be a family member. We could have a family member die. The Lord could take our lives. And there's a lot of people that I've seen. I've seen some personal cases myself. I've seen some that people have told me about where the person was a Christian. They were doing what's right, got out of church, started doing the wrong thing, started running with the wrong crowd. The Lord sent people their way to try to get them back on the right track, and they just never allowed the Lord to work in their heart, never allowed that conviction to go further, and they ended up being killed at a young age. They ended up going to heaven early because they would not allow the Lord to work in their lives. I've seen others that were the opposite. They got out of church, started doing the things of the world, started living like the world, and something happened in their lives, and they got back in church, started reading the Bible, started following the Lord again, and a lot of those end up doing things that are absolutely wonderful and great for the Lord. They end up being pastors, missionaries, evangelists, all sorts of things. And it's the Lord is going to give you trials, but most of the time those trials are to either test your faith because you're close to Him, or it's to get you back to Him. And unfortunately for most of us, those trials are not to test us because we're already close to Him. Most of the time, it's because we're so far away. He's trying to put something in our lives that forces us to rely on Him. There's only, not that every illness or every disease is a trial from the Lord to bring you back to Him, or because you're in the wrong, or because you're doing something wrong. But it always can be used to glorify the Lord. If somebody has cancer, the only thing you can do as a Christian is trust the Lord. Yes, you can hope that the doctors know what they're doing. Yes, you can trust that the surgeons know what they're doing. But ultimately, they can only do so much. We only have so much information on cancer. We only have so many ways to try to fight cancer. But God, like I said earlier, is the ultimate physician. And we have to trust Him at that point, and we have to just let the Lord work. And it's either we can grow closer to the Lord and rest in His arms and allow Him to comfort us, or we can reject that and we can go to the world. We can go back to our bad habits. We can go back to our old sins, and we can grow further away from the Lord. But thankfully, that doesn't have to be the case. Thankfully, there is a remedy. There is something that we can do to avoid going to Egypt. There's something that we can do to avoid going back to our sins and going back to the bad habits that we have when we're in a trial. One thing is looking at our past and seeing what God has done for us up to that point. Most of the time, these people did not look at their past. They did not say, hey, let's just sit down and let's talk about what God has done for us since we came out of Egypt, or since the Lord led me away from Ur of the Chaldees, or ever since the foundation of our kingdom, Israel. Let's talk about some of the wonderful things that God has done for us and how He's taken care of us. Most of the time, it's just, man, this sucks. I'm gone. So that's one thing that we can do. We can sit down. We can think about the different things that God's done for us since we got saved. We can think about things because God did things for us before we got saved. Just because we weren't saved doesn't mean that God didn't bless us and God didn't do things that were beneficial to us. That's one of the things we can do, is just allow the Lord to comfort us with the things that He's done for us in our past. Next thing that we can do is we can look in the Bible. We can look in the Bible for people that had these similar experiences and see that even though they were in a trial, they were in trouble, God took them through it. If you think about the storm on the Sea of Galilee, so you've got fishermen. They just left a wonderful service, and now they're on a boat. They're in the middle of the sea, and storm comes up. Most of the time, if you think about it, these guys, before they became disciples, most of them were commercial fishermen. So they were used to the sea. They were used to the storms. And this storm was so great that they were worried that their boat was going to sink. So this wasn't just some little, squall. This wasn't something that one of us would be like, oh no, what's going to happen? These guys are seasoned fishermen. They're seasoned men on the sea, and now they're scared for their life, thinking, man, what's going to happen here? And sure enough, one instance, the Lord walks on the water to them and tells the storm to be at peace, be still. And in another one, Jesus is in the boat, He's asleep. God, and that's the way that it is. God is not sitting there wringing His hands when we're going through a trial. God's not sitting there worried about what's going to happen to us, or if we're going to be able to pay our bills, or if we're going to be able to get through this cancer treatment, or this whatever issue we've got going on. They're in the middle of the storm. They're thinking, man, we're going to sink. We're all going to die. Jesus is down here. He's taking a nap. He's as at rest. He is as comfortable as he could possibly be. He has no problem whatsoever. He's not worried. They go down to Him. They say, hey, Jesus, carest not that we perish. And Jesus rebukes the wind, rebukes the sea, and it stops immediately. So we can look at different areas of the Bible and see how God provided for these people. You've got the woman that she was going to bake her last loaf of bread, or whatever, her little cake that she was going to bake, and that was the plan. We're going to bake this, we're going to eat it, we're going to die. They just assumed, hey, we ain't got nothing else, we're going to die. Oh well, that's all we can do. Next thing you know, you've got, I think it was Elijah that comes up, and he says, hey, I'm hungry, give me a cake. That lady could have been like, no, I'm not giving you. This is all I have for me and my son. We're going to eat it. We're going to die. At least let us die with, our last meal that we planned. But she doesn't do that. She trusts the Lord, and she says, okay. So she bakes him his cake. He eats it, and then she ends up having I think it was her flour, was just bottomless essentially, and she never had to worry about it again. But that was because she trusted the Lord. She could have said, no, thank you, I'm good. And more than likely, their plan would have happened. They would have eaten that cake, they would have died, and that would have been it. But instead, they trusted the Lord, and the Lord took care of them. So there's always a way out. Most of the time, we take the wrong way out. Most of the time, we go back to what's comfortable, we go back to what's easy, we go back to what's simple, and we go back to habits, we go back to besetting sins. But that's not the best way out. Every time we do that, there's going to be a consequence. There's going to be something negative. There may be some positives during that time, but there's always going to be a negative. There's always going to be a consequence. But the best way out is to trust in the Lord. The best way out is to allow the Lord to have His will done in our lives, and to allow us to grow closer to Him. And a lot of times, it may be something that's very simple. It may not be something big, but it's still something that you're struggling with. It's still something that's a trial in your life. And you can also remember that there's always somebody that's dealing with something worse. anything that I can be going through, someone else in the world has a worse situation. Um, that was one of the things my father-in-law used to tell us. We had some things going on. We moved from. I had a really good job in Tennessee. we had we were making very good money. My wife didn't have to work, and things started getting a little weird at work. And I just wasn't sure that that's where I needed to continue to stay. And we prayed about it and decided, well, let's move to North Carolina. Let's start our own business. So we prayed about it. We talked to our pastor. We got some advice outside of family, and everything that happened, we felt this was the right move. Um, there was a Sunday school lesson one day that really just kind of hit home for me that this was the move. So we moved to North Carolina. We got our house sold. Moved in with my in-laws, and we lived with them for about 7 or 8 months. Started looking for our own place, and so we buy a house, and within a week, before the end of the week, I think we closed on a Monday. Before the end of the week, our septic system was backed up. So we're like, "What? You got to be joking!" So we assumed it was something small. I've worked in plumbing. I know septic systems shouldn't be a big deal. So we spend some money. We get it pumped. Have a couple other things done, and they're like, "All right, you should be good to go." So a couple weeks go by, backs up again. We're like, "What in the world?" So we get somebody else out. They come out. We spend a couple $1,000s, and they say, "Yeah, everything's good. You shouldn't have any more problems." So about a month goes by, and I wake up. We haven't used any water at all. No toilets flush, no showers, nothing, and our toilet's bubbling. I'm like, "You got to be joking," because that means that there's water getting into the system, and it was raining, so that means somehow there's water getting into the system. And me and my brother-in-law spent a couple of hours digging it up, getting it capped off so no water could get in the house, and we moved back with my in-laws. Got this county out there to look at it, and they say the whole thing has to be replaced. They said it was installed too deep to begin with. It's just barely above the water table, so every time it rains, it's just going to fill up. It can't be that low. So we're like, "Man, we just bought this house. What are we supposed to do? Like, we don't have the money to fix it." So we find a way to pay for it, get started, and they ended up having to put a pump system in. So we're like, "Okay, well, no big deal. We'll just have an electrician run the electrical for it." So the electrician comes in and says, "Well, your panel's in a bathroom. It's not allowed to be in the bathroom. If we do any work to it, we're going to have to move it and get it outside of the house." So now we got more that we have to pay for. So at this point, this is probably the biggest trial that we'd gone through at the time, and we're just we're sitting there, we're wringing our hands. What are we going to do? How are we going to be able to pay for this? How are we going to afford this? We just bought this house. Nobody told us that we were going to have septic issues. They acted like there was nothing wrong with the system. So the initial thought is not, let's just pray about it. Let's get in the Word. Let's just allow the Lord to work through it. He'll pay for it. He'll do what He needs to do. The initial reaction was just to get frustrated with the Lord. Like, why are you letting this happen? What is the deal? Why are we having to deal with this? We followed you. We thought that this was the right house, and now we're going through all of these issues. And like I said, my father-in-law, anytime that I would call him and just be frustrated and angry about it, he would say, "Look, it could be worse." He's like, "You've got a septic system that has to be replaced. You got to spend some money, big deal. Your kids aren't in the hospital. Your kids don't have cancer. There's so many other people that are dealing with so much worse than you are in your life. Don't use this as a way to just get angry at God. Use this as a way to get closer to Him. Use this as a way to find out, not why is this happening, but how can I use this in my life to grow closer to you?" And it's one of those things where you don't want to listen. You want to just be mad, because for some reason as humans, we enjoy being mad. We enjoy being angry. I don't know why. We enjoy complaining. If you get a group of people together, the easiest thing to find in common is things that you don't like, right? So So if you meet somebody new and they realize, hey, I don't like this and he doesn't like this, we're going to bond over it. We're going to talk about it. Now, you can still find things that you like that can create a bond, but so many times instead of that, it's like, hey, I hate this. He hates this, and now we're best buddies because we can complain about it together. Um, but it's so much easier just to get mad at God. It's so much easier to get angry at God, and just retreat back, get out of the Word, get out of our prayer life, and just rely on ourselves. How am I going to pay for this? How am I going to do this? How am I going to get through this situation? When it should all be, Lord, I don't know how this is going to happen, but I know you're going to take care of it. You're in control. You let us here. You let us buy this house. I know that you're going to take care of it, and we'll be fine. Everything's fine. It's not a big deal. It got paid for. It got done. And we sat there for a couple months, just frustrated and angry and anxious, and it just every time we turned around, it felt like something else was going on. But ultimately, we got it done. It got paid for, and we got moved back in. It's not had any issues since. But just remember that when we start to go through trials, we start to go through troubles, we don't have to go back into the world. We don't have to allow ourselves to jump back into sin. We don't have to get out of the Word. We don't have to stop praying. We don't have to stop going to church. All of those, that's the worst thing that we can do. The best thing that we can do is we can, the Bible talks about confess your faults to one another. That doesn't mean go talk to a priest and tell them all the sins you committed. That means go talk to people about the issues you're having. Go talk to them about your struggles. Talk to someone. You're much better off going to church, finding somebody that is closer than you to the Lord, and tell them, hey, this is some stuff that I'm dealing with. This is some stuff that I'm struggling with. How can you help me? What good advice can you give me? What experiences have you had? I guarantee you, Brother Ray and Brother Gilbert have had a lot more life experience than I did, or I have. And if I've got a problem and I go to them and I say, hey, this is what I'm struggling with, I'm guaranteed they may not have the exact same situation or the same circumstance, but they can say, hey, I experienced something similar in my life. I went through this, and this, and the Lord brought me through it. And we need to stay in church. We need to stay in the book. We need to keep our prayer life up, and we need to allow the Lord to lead us and not be like Abram and all of these other people in the Bible who just took the easy route and went to Egypt and then ended up having to suffer the consequences for it. Let's go ahead and pray. Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you for the wonderful things that you do for us. Lord, I thank you that even in trials, even in tribulations, that we have a way to escape. Lord, that there's always a bright side. Lord, there's a song that says, God sees the storm from the other side. You know exactly what's going to happen, and there's no need for us to fret, and there's no need for us to worry. And Lord, just help us to have faith in you and trust you, and just to follow you in everything that we do, Lord, and not allow these troubles and trials to push us away, but to draw us closer to you. Thank you for all you do for us. Lord, I ask you to help us have a good rest of the week. Bring us all back safely on Wednesday night. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. You're dismissed.